My mother was the Queen for a very long time. And although you kind of know that this might happen, you don't really think about it very much. Not least of all because the monarchy is about continuity.
Exactly at 5:42 a.m., an official declaration bearing the sovereign seal was released to the public with immediate execution. The words were brief, clinical, and completely devastating. Camilla's tenure as Queen Consort had been terminated with immediate effect, and Princess Anne was officially appointed to take her place beside the king. There was no gradual transition, no ceremonial farewell, and no private period of negotiation. In a single moment, the entire order of the royal family was altered. Camilla read the paper twice in her private room. Her hands shook as her fingers pressed against the heavy cardstock. When her private secretary walked into the study, she looked up and asked why no one had warned her. The king's signature was fixed at the bottom, crisp and dark. Beside it sat the royal seal, proving that this was not a rumor, a temporary measure, or an action subject to appeal. The decision was already final.
But I think for my brother, this is something he's been waiting for, and he's probably spent more time thinking about it. For the rest of us, it's more a question of, okay, we have to shift the way we support.
At St. James's Palace, Princess Anne received the exact same document. She did not sit down to read it. She stood by the window, scanned the text once, and laid it face down on the mahogany table. She looked at her aide and said plainly that she had never asked to take another woman's place, yet she understood the weight of the order. The institutional machinery was moving, and she would not allow it to fail. The title of Queen Consort belongs by tradition to the wife of the ruling monarch. Transferring those exact public duties to the king's sister without dissolving the marriage was an unprecedented move. It stripped away the public function while leaving the legal bond intact. One specific sentence in the notice was far sharper than the rest. It declared that the change was necessary to protect the continuity, discipline, and credibility of the crown during a time of internal instability. Those carefully chosen words meant everything. The crown is an institution, and its power depends entirely on the trust of the public. To Camilla, those words were a public humiliation delivered without warning. To Anne, they were an absolute call to duty. To King Charles, sitting alone in his study after authorizing the release, they represented the bitter cost of a boundary he could no longer afford to ignore. The king stared at the fountain pen resting on his desk, while repeated knocks on his door went completely unanswered. He had signed the document before dawn, hours before his wife even woke up. The timing proved that the decision had not been made in a rush of anger. It had been prepared in complete silence over weeks of careful planning. Across the corridor, Prince William cancelled 2 morning briefings and demanded a private review of the files. The Prince of Wales knew that the public statement showed only the surface of the crisis. Something deeper had broken inside the walls of the palace, something that could no longer be patched over with polite smiles. Then came the detail that left senior officials entirely silent. A second sealed document existed, locked inside the sovereign's private safe. The palace refused to publish its contents. Princess Anne made it clear that she would not step into her new public role until she knew exactly what Camilla had done and why her brother had waited until that exact morning to act. To understand this collapse, you cannot simply look at formal titles.
And what does that shift look like for you?
Well, that's we don't know yet. I mean, there was an order to the years because my mother didn't change very much. We kind of knew what the rhythm of the year was, so things like that will change, and how we are part of the support for the monarchy may change slightly. Who knows?
Behind the gold trim and historical names were three people bound together by decades of shared history, marriage, and duty. Now, they were divided by a breach of trust none of them could hide. Hi viewers, do you think King Charles made the right choice by removing Camilla to protect the royal family, or was he being too harsh? Drop a quick yes or no in the comments below. I really want to know where you stand on this. Before we uncover the hidden memorandum that forced the king's hand, take a quick second to hit that subscribe button. By subscribing, you ensure you won't miss a single chapter as this institutional mystery unfolds. Camilla had spent decades enduring public criticism, cold palace halls, and quiet doubts about whether she truly belonged beside the king. The role of consort had become her proof that she was finally accepted by the institution. Now, that proof was stripped away in a single morning. Anne felt no sense of victory. She had earned her standing through years of hard work, military associations, and quiet service. She never sought affection or headlines. That was precisely why palace officials trusted her to step in without creating further public panic. Yet, in a private conversation with William, the Princess Royal admitted the truth. Duty could not erase the cruelty of replacing someone within her own family. William heard deep frustration in her voice, not ambition. The king remembered a promise he had made years earlier. He had sworn to his wife that she would never again be left alone to face public judgment. Now, his own signature had broken that exact promise. Charles held an old photograph of himself and his sister as children when William entered the room. The photograph revealed what his silence tried to hide. The trust between the king and his sister had been forged long before Camilla ever entered his life. Camilla removed a diamond brooch from her dress and placed it inside its velvet case. She looked at her aide and said the palace had not just adjusted her schedule, it had erased her entire future. Those words were written down in the secretary's official log, recording the exact moment her royal life ended. William pressed his father for answers. The king explained that Anne had been chosen because she commanded respect across the armed forces, the administration, and the entire family, but he still hesitated to explain why the removal had to be immediate. Then, the private memorandum was brought into the light. The document showed that Camilla had tried to expand her office, attempting to place key royal functions under staff loyal strictly to her. Anne refused to wear any official insignia of the new position until she heard Camilla's direct account of what happened. William then revealed that the real crisis had begun 3 weeks earlier, during a service at Windsor Castle. It was during that ceremony that the Queen Consort issued an order that directly contradicted the king. When William named the specific event, Charles finally looked up. Everyone in that room knew it was the moment of no return. Camilla's secretary knew the order was not drawn up overnight. It had been drafted 3 weeks earlier under direct orders from the Prince of Wales's office. Prince William stood by the door, holding a black leather binder. Inside was absolute proof that the public announcement was only the surface of a much deeper betrayal. 3 weeks before the Dawn Declaration shockwave hit the press, Windsor Castle hosted what was supposed to be a flawless exhibition of institutional unity. Rain slicked the ancient stone courtyards. Gold leaf gleamed under vaulted arches. The royal service of continuity required senior family members to execute a symbolic pledge, a formal sign-off confirming their exact administrative boundaries during the king's reign. Order was everything. Rank was survival. I watched Princess Anne step into the gathering space moments before the procession. Her sharp eyes caught the alteration instantly. She walked to the ceremonial table, picked up her seating card, and studied the heavy cardstock without saying a single word. Her name had been moved. Her standing position had been demoted. She raised her head and asked a waiting usher who had ordered her displacement. Camilla stepped out from the adjacent corridor before the official could answer. Her voice was steady, but her posture was tight. She drew the Princess Royal into a recessed alcove, insisting that the modern monarchy could not function if the king's wife appeared subordinate to his sister in the official order of precedence. Camilla argued that her office required unyielding, visible authority if palace staff were expected to follow her administrative directives. Anne did not raise her voice. She stepped closer. She told Camilla that precedence was not a personal trophy awarded for marriage, but a rigid discipline engineered to preserve the integrity of the crown. She warned that shifting seating arrangements without sovereign clearance crossed an unpardonable boundary. It signaled that one private household was attempting to speak with the authority of the king himself. Charles entered the room just as the quiet confrontation peaked. His face was pale. He opened the red leather ceremonial folder, found the unauthorized replacement page tucked inside, and tore it cleanly down the binding. The sound of ripping paper echoed in the stone hall like a gun report. He tossed the scrap into a bin and ordered the original order restored immediately. When Camilla accused him in a harsh whisper of humiliating her in front of staff, the king answered with cold clarity. He told her she had humiliated herself the moment she issued an instruction in his name without his consent. The damage was already done. The line had been crossed. That evening, the keeper of the privy records drafted an internal breach memorandum, cataloguing conduct that violated institutional protocol. When the audit hit my desk, the reality became terrifyingly clear. Windsor was not an isolated emotional outburst. It was the tip of a massive administrative spear. Over the preceding 8 weeks, 3 separate instructions had been issued under Camilla's signature. Staff appointments had been altered. Patronage announcements had been intercepted. Military access privileges had been systematically redirected toward her private office. She was quietly building an empire within an empire. Anne urged her brother to handle the issue privately, hoping to save the family from public shame. But the altered ceremonial document had already been seen by senior government officials. Silence was no longer an option. It was an endorsement. Charles summoned his wife for a private reckoning. The removal order rested on his desk, unsigned, waiting in the dark space between personal affection and institutional survival. By the time Camilla walked into that room, the dispute was no longer about a seating card. It was about who held the ultimate authority over the crown. An internal audit revealed that Camilla's private secretary had quietly redirected senior patronage announcements and military access privileges away from Princess Anne's established offices. The audit proved something far more dangerous than simple personal rivalry. It exposed a calculated, silent reallocation of power that threatened to fracture the entire administrative hierarchy of the royal household. While Princess Anne operated within strict institutional budgets, Camilla's private office began expanding its reach. New staff members were hired without board approval. Press statements were drafted in secret. A separate public relations campaign was quietly launched to elevate the consort's independent image. This double standard created immense friction behind closed doors. Loyal staff who questioned the new orders were quietly transferred or pushed out. A culture of fear took hold in the corridors. Prince William observed these subtle shifts with growing alarm. As the heir to the throne, he understood that any erosion of governance today would directly compromise his own ability to rule tomorrow. He began his own silent investigation. He requested a full review of all internal communications originating from the consort's office over the previous 6 months. What his legal team uncovered went far beyond administrative overreach. It was a systematic effort to reshape the future of the monarchy itself. Buried within a series of draft policy documents was a confidential file labeled with an innocent name, the Future Household Transition Protocol. On its surface, the paper claimed to streamline administrative handovers between reigns. In reality, the clauses were designed to lock in permanent funding, private staff allocations, and housing rights for Camilla's network, long after King Charles's reign came to an end. It was an unprecedented attempt to bind the hands of the next king. William took the discovery directly to his legal advisors. They confirmed his worst fears. If signed, this framework would give a former consort unprecedented leverage over the future monarch's private archives and estate management. The betrayal was personal, calculated, and devastating. William knew he had to act, not just as a son protecting his father, but as the Prince of Wales safeguarding the continuity of the realm. He requested an immediate, unannounced meeting in the sovereign's private study. He brought the black leather binder containing every flagged memo, every altered clause, and every unauthorized directive. When Charles read the hidden terms of the transition framework, the color drained from his face. The blinders fell away. He realized that his desire to protect his wife had blinded him to the dangerous game being played in his name. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The king closed the file, picked up his pen, and looked toward the door as Prince William stepped forward with the final piece of evidence. The leather binder hit the mahogany desk with a dull, heavy thud. Prince William stood over the table, his arms folded, his face stone. The Prince of Wales was no longer asking questions. He was delivering an ultimatum. Camilla sat rigid in her armchair, her hands clasped tightly around a handkerchief. For the first time since the pre-dawn crisis began, her composure completely shattered. The paper trail had caught up with her. Charles looked at his son, then down at the transition framework exposed in the black folder. His hands trembled as he turned the pages. Each line item was a sharp blow to his sense of trust. William pointed to a specific paragraph near the bottom of page 14. The clause attempted to grant Camilla's private office unilateral control over royal archival releases for a decade following any transition of power. It was a direct infringement on sovereign privilege. Charles asked his wife directly if she had read this specific clause before her office sent it to the draft committee. Camilla claimed she had merely signed off on her secretary's broad recommendations without examining every technical detail. That answer was not enough. In the uncompromising world of royal administration, ignorance is not an excuse. It is proof of negligence. William looked at his father and asked the central question holding the entire institution hostage. Was the king acting as a protective husband, or was he acting as the sovereign bound by oath to protect the crown? The king closed his eyes. The weight of his entire life, his decades of waiting, his controversial marriage, and his solemn duty crashed down upon him in that single quiet study. He picked up the fountain pen resting on the blotter. The ink was dark. His hand was steady now. He aligned the removal declaration alongside the appointment order for Princess Anne. With a single, unbroken stroke, King Charles signed his name at the bottom of the decree. The stroke of that pen terminated Camilla's public status as Queen Consort with immediate effect. The silence that followed was absolute. The legal machinery had turned, and there was no turning back. Prince William stood by the door holding the black leather binder, watching as the king officially closed the chapter on his own private compromise. The ink was still wet on the sovereign seal when the administrative stripping began. Power in a palace does not vanish with loud outbursts. It dissolves quietly through altered schedules, revoked access codes, collected keys, and closed doors that suddenly refuse to open. Before Camilla could even leave the king's study, her chief equerry was informed that every upcoming public engagement had been suspended. The red dispatch boxes assigned to the consort were recalled. Her security classification was immediately downgraded. An official entered the room, carrying a velvet tray, and asked for the custom pass that identified her household authority. Camilla looked directly at Charles. The king looked away. Her fingers tightened around the card before she finally laid it on the fabric. She told her husband that the card was a symbol of their shared life. The king answered softly that it represented an office, not their marriage. She looked him in the eye and said the palace had made those two things impossible to separate. Anne stepped forward to deliver the decisive principle. She looked directly at Camilla and stated that if authority can be borrowed through marriage today without the king's consent, then the sovereign's word will mean nothing tomorrow. The line was drawn. The boundary was absolute. The execution moved with brutal efficiency. Princess Anne assumed immediate operational control over ceremonial duties and household governance. Protocol officers worked against the clock to alter stationery, seating plans, press distribution lists, and access authorizations before the evening news cycle hit the airwaves. Every altered document was critical. Any administrative confusion would signal to the world that the monarchy had lost control of its own internal machinery. Anne walked into the consort's private office and found an unfinished speech lying on the desk. She did not discard it. She folded it neatly and requested that it be delivered privately to Camilla's personal quarters. She understood that taking over a role did not grant permission to erase the human being who had occupied it. Prince William issued strict instructions to the staff. He demanded that Camilla be treated with absolute personal dignity throughout the departure. He warned that humiliation would turn an institutional necessity into personal cruelty. Yet the mechanical machinery of the crown could not be slowed down. As Camilla walked down the long grand gallery, a courtier removed her brass nameplate from the cabinet room door. The faint metallic click echoed down the hall, like a hammer hitting an anvil. Within minutes, the network that had surrounded her for years completely dissolved. Her closest advisors were suspended pending a full formal review. Charles allowed his wife to keep her private residence and personal titles, proving he sought to strip her institutional power without destroying their personal bond. But Camilla rejected the quiet rear exit. She walked down the main staircase with her head held high, passing dozens of staff members who stood in complete, heavy silence. Anne received the first official dispatch box of her new role, but she left it locked on the desk. She refused to open it until she had spoken face-to-face with her predecessor, away from lawyers, aides, and courtiers. Hours after the announcement shattered the public, Anne crossed the corridor alone to discover if anything personal could survive the cold demands of the crown. Camilla sat alone in her private room, beside an untouched cup of tea, still wearing the formal attire chosen for an engagement she would never attend. The Princess Royal closed the door behind her and remained standing. Camilla asked if she had come to inspect what was left of her life. Anne replied that she had come because the crown had spoken, but the family had not. Anne stated plainly that she had never wanted the title and would hold the post only as long as stability required. She assured Camilla that no secretarial logs would be kept of their conversation, no lawyers would shape their words, and Charles would not enter to protect either of them from the truth. Camilla finally broke her silence. She confessed that fear had driven every decision she made, fear of being pushed aside, fear of becoming powerless as the king's health and energy faced growing public scrutiny. After decades of being treated as an outsider, every administrative limit placed on her office felt like proof that the institution still expected her to disappear. Anne listened quietly, but she did not retreat from her stance. She noted that fear explained her choices, but could never excuse them. Using the king's authority to overrule the very structure he had sworn to protect crossed a boundary that affection could not erase. When Camilla asked if Anne believed her love for Charles was ever genuine, the Princess Royal gave a lingering answer. Love was never the issue. The danger began the exact moment love was used as a justification for power. As the afternoon sun dipped behind the palace gates, the news broke across global networks. Broadcasters interrupted regular scheduling. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace under a steady grey rain. The public was instantly split between those who saw Anne's appointment as a necessary restoration of order and those who viewed Camilla's removal as a cold betrayal. Inside Clarence House, Charles met his sister before their first joint appearance. His hands trembled as he fastened his gold cufflinks. He looked at Anne and admitted the pain was almost unbearable. She looked back and reminded him that pain was the price of authority. The next morning, King Charles entered the National Cathedral with Princess Anne walking steadily at his side. She wore no elaborate jewels, no grand displays of rank. Her posture made it clear she was there to support her brother, not to celebrate a triumph. Camilla watched the service on a small screen from her private country home. The unfinished speech sat on the table beside her. Grief remained, sharp and heavy, but a quiet sense of clarity had begun to take its place. The palace had stopped the struggle before the fight for power completely destroyed the marriage. Charles visited her privately after the service concluded. He left his royal briefing binders outside the room, entering not as the sovereign who had signed her removal, but as a husband seeking forgiveness. Camilla accepted responsibility for approving documents she had failed to read thoroughly. Charles admitted that his own reluctance to set boundaries had allowed ambitious aides to grow out of control. Anne accepted the new role under published, written limits. She could not alter succession plans, reassign staff, or change precedents without full parliamentary oversight. Prince William endorsed these exact boundaries, ensuring transparency across every branch of the royal household. The investigation cleared junior staff members and dismantled every unauthorized framework. The palace survived because no single individual was permitted to stand above the institution. The record was set. The hierarchy was restored. But just as the dust began to settle over Camilla's sudden removal, an unsealed file from 1994 was delivered to Prince William's desk late last night. It contains a forgotten, handwritten letter signed by Queen Elizabeth II herself, detailing a secret clause about the royal succession that was never meant to be opened while Charles was on the throne. What is written on page 3 changes everything we thought we knew about who is actually next in line. You cannot afford to miss what we uncover in the next chapter.